Imagine a book so dangerous that emperors ordered it burned, so valuable that monks spent years copying it by hand, so controversial that people were imprisoned, tortured, and executed simply for possessing or translating it. And yet it survived, despite wars, invasions, censorship, shipwrecks, fires, and 2,000 years of attempts to erase it. Today we are uncovering the obscure history of the Holy Bible. When most people think about the Bible, they picture a single book sitting on a shelf. But for most of human history, nothing like that existed. In fact, if you traveled back 3,000 years and asked someone where the Bible was, they wouldn't understand the question because there wasn't a Bible. There were only stories, stories passed from one generation to another from memory. Long before printing presses and libraries, memory itself was humanity's greatest archive. In the ancient Near East, oral tradition was not viewed as unreliable folklore, it was sacred responsibility. Entire histories, family records, songs, and laws were memorized and carefully preserved because the survival of a people often depended on it. Over centuries, these traditions slowly found their way onto scrolls, different authors in different places at different times kings, priests, shepherds, poets, prisoners. Some wrote in times of prosperity, others wrote during wars and exile. Most didn't know each other or even live during the same time period. Yet somehow, over nearly 1,500 years, their writings would eventually become one collection. Some books tell history, others contain poetry, some record laws, others preserve prophecies. Ecclesiastes wrestles with meaning. Psalms sings praises and laments. Proverbs offers wisdom. And Job asks why suffering exists. Thousands of years later, humanity is still reading these words. History is full of lost voices, books that no longer exist, stories that disappeared forever. And surprisingly, the Bible itself preserves clues about some of these vanished writings. Few people realize this, but within its pages, the Bible mentions books that historians can no longer find. The Book of Jasher, the Book of Wars of the Lord, the Chronicles of the Kings of Israel, the Chronicles of the Kings of Judah. All books that existed at some point in history but are now gone. Some may have been historical records, other collections were possibly songs or royal archives, but somewhere in time they disappeared. The ancient world was far more fragile than modern life. There were no backup hard drives or cloud storage. Every manuscript had to be copied by hand. Scribes spent years producing text letter by letter, but in the blink of an eye, it could all be gone. In 586 BC, disaster struck. Babylon conquered Jerusalem. The city burned, the temple destroyed. Many thousands were carried away into exile. But far from home, Jewish scribes began preserving traditions with a renewed urgency. Ironically, one of the darkest moments in Jewish history helped preserve the writings that would later become the Old Testament. In the year 303 AD, Roman Emperor Diocletian and his junior co emperor Galerius launched what would become known as the Great Persecution, the most severe attempt by the Roman Empire to suppress Christianity. Believing that Christianity threatened traditional Roman religion and the unity of the empire, they issued a series of edicts ordering churches destroyed, Christian scriptures confiscated and burned, and Christians removed from government positions. Many believers were imprisoned, tortured, and executed, while others were forced to sacrifice to the Roman gods or face punishment. The persecution varied in intensity across the empire and continued for several years, but failed to eliminate Christianity. Instead, many Christians preserved their faith and scriptures in secret, and stories of martyrs strengthened Christian communities. Ironically, within a decade the tide had turned. After Emperor Constantine's victory at the Battle of Milvian Bridge in AD 312, and the issuance of the Edict of Milan in AD 313, Christianity became legally tolerated, ending the persecution that Diocletian and Galerius had hoped would destroy it. For centuries, monks and scribes played a crucial role in preserving the Bible before the invention of the printing press. Working in monasteries across Europe and the Middle East, these dedicated copyists carefully reproduced biblical manuscripts by hand, often spending months or even years creating a single copy. They worked in special rooms called scriptoria, where they meticulously copied each word, checked for errors, and decorated pages with elaborate artwork, colorful illustrations, and ornate lettering. Their efforts helped ensure that the scriptures survived wars, invasions, natural disasters, and passage of time during periods when books were rare and fragile. Beyond simply copying the text, monks and scribes helped preserve biblical scholarship and literacy throughout the medieval world. Many translated manuscripts, added explanatory notes, and protected valuable collections of biblical writings in monastery libraries. Their copies became the foundation for later translations and printed editions of the Bible. Without their painstaking work, many ancient biblical manuscripts might have been lost forever. Their dedication allowed the Bible to be passed from one generation to generation, bridging the gap between the ancient world and the modern era, and helping make the scriptures available to millions of people today. In the late 14th century, John Wycliffe emerged as one of the earliest advocates for making the Bible accessible to ordinary people. At a time when the scriptures were primarily available in Latin and largely confined to clergy and scholars, Wycliffe argued that the Bible should be the highest authority in matters of faith, and that every Christian should be able to read it in his or her own language. Under his influence, the first complete translation of the Bible into Middle English was produced from the Latin Vulgate. Because the printing press had not yet been invented, copies had to be painstakingly written by hand and circulated by his followers, known as Lollards. Wycliffe's teachings brought him into conflict with church authorities, and decades after his death, his remains were exhumed and burned as a symbol of condemnation. Nevertheless, his vision of placing Scripture into the hands of ordinary believers laid important foundations for later reformers and helped spark a movement that would eventually transform Christianity. For thousands of years, every manuscript required a human hand, which was painstakingly slow and labor intensive. Then everything changed. Around 1450, Johannes Gutenberg revolutionized communication by perfecting a system of movable metal type, oil based ink, and the screw press. His greatest achievement, the Gutenberg Bible, produced around 1455, became one of the first major books printed in Europe. Roughly 180 copies were made, a remarkable number for the time. Gutenberg's invention transformed the spread of knowledge. What once required years of labor by monks and scribes could now be reproduced in weeks. Books became more affordable, literacy gradually increased, and ideas could spread faster than kings or church authorities could control them. The Bible became increasingly accessible to ordinary people and helped usher in the Protestant Reformation. A new era had begun. By the Middle Ages, most Bibles in Western Europe existed only in Latin. Ordinary people couldn't read them, so the reformers began asking a dangerous question. What if common people could read the scriptures themselves? One of the most famous advocates was William Tyndale. Tyndale translated the New Testament directly from original Greek rather than from the Latin Vulgate. Believing that ordinary people should be able to read Scripture in their own language, Tyndale worked in exile on the European continent because translating the Bible into English without authorization was extremely dangerous in England. His translations were printed and secretly smuggled into the country, where they spread widely despite official efforts to suppress them. Tyndale was arrested, imprisoned, and executed in 1536, but his work had lasting impact. His clear and memorable phrasing influenced later Bibles, especially the 1611 King James Version. In 1604, King James I of England authorized a new translation to unify competing English Bibles and reduce religious divisions. 54 scholars organized into 6 committees worked from Hebrew and Greek manuscripts while consulting earlier translations, particularly William Tyndale's work. After 7 years of collaboration and careful review, the King James Bible was published in 1611. Revered for its majestic language and literary beauty, it became one of the most influential books in the English speaking world, shaping religion, literature, culture, and everyday speech for centuries, and leaving a lasting legacy that endures to this day. In 1844, German biblical scholar Constantin von Tischendorf visited St. Catherine's Monastery and discovered portions of what became the Codex Sinaiticus, one of the oldest and most important surviving copies of the Christian Bible. Written in Greek around AD 350, the manuscript contains nearly the entire New Testament and large portions of the Old Testament. Its discovery provided scholars with biblical text that was more than 1,000 years older than many manuscripts then available, allowing them to compare later copies with much earlier ones and better understand how the text had been transmitted over the centuries. The Codex Sinaiticus made a major contribution to biblical scholarship and Christianity by providing one of the earliest witnesses to the text of Scripture. Along with other ancient manuscripts such as the Codex Sinaiticus, it helped scholars produce more accurate editions and translations of the Bible and offer insight into the belief and practices of early Christians. In 1947, a young Bedouin shepherd was searching for a lost goat near the cliffs of Qumran by the Dead Sea. After throwing a stone into a cave, he heard the sound of breaking pottery and discovered large clay jars containing ancient scrolls. Over the following years, archaeologists and local Bedouin uncovered thousands of manuscript fragments from 11 caves, including portions from nearly every book of the Old Testament. When scholars compared the Dead Sea Scrolls with later biblical manuscripts, they found a remarkable degree of consistency. Although there were a few differences in spelling, word order, and occasional phrases, as would be expected from hand copied text over many centuries, the overall content was strikingly similar. The discovery demonstrated that the biblical text had been transmitted with extreme care over the centuries. Over the last 2 centuries, biblical archaeology has uncovered a wealth of discoveries that have illuminated the historical world of the Bible. Excavations throughout Israel and the Middle East have revealed ancient cities, inscriptions, tunnels, and artifacts that provide valuable context for understanding biblical events and people. Finds such as the Tel Dan Stele, which contains a reference to the house of David, the Pilate Stone confirming the existence of Pontius Pilate, the Pool of Siloam in Jerusalem, and the Dead Sea Scrolls have helped scholars better understand the cultures, languages, and historical settings in which the biblical texts were written. Today, the Bible remains the most widely read, distributed, and translated book in human history, with portions available in thousands of languages and billions of copies printed. Its influence extends far beyond religion, shaping laws, ethics, literature, art, music, and the everyday speech of countless societies. For Christians, it remains the foundation of faith and worship, while historians and scholars study it as one of the most important documents of human civilization. From ancient scrolls hidden in desert caves to digital versions accessible on smartphones around the world, the Bible's impact continues to span cultures and generations, making it the most enduring and influential book ever written.